I got the exhibit from this morning from the defense. State, you have an objection to that? Remember the chart that the witness drew on?
The one that is different than the one he drew on in court?
I didn't look at it, to be honest with you. I just knew I received it because I just wanted to talk about it only in court. So you're objecting?
I am, Your Honor. Basically, what the email indicated from Mr. Robinson was that he deleted the one that he drafted in court in front of the jury, but redid it and added some additional things and then signed it. So I would object to an exhibit that's been prepared now outside of the jury's presence, now being admitted. I understand it's a little unfortunate that Mr. Robinson wasn't able to memorialize what he did in court, but I would object to him introducing this additional exhibit.
Mr. Lunneman, your response? Can't hear you. What?
I have to call him to see if he saved that. I don't disagree with the state on the one he sent.
Yeah.
Why he would do that? Professional witness for a long time, but I'm going to call him when we get out of court to see if I can get.
Right, so we all agree that the current exhibit is not admissible since it has information that was not presented to the jury,
Yes,
correct? All right, so I can delete this email?
yes.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're back on the record on State versus Loyd. He's present with his attorney. State Attorney's Office is present. Dr. Gamache, have you gone through all of your notes?
Yes, I have.
All right, does State wish to review his notes or defense?
We do not.
Defense, you want to review his notes? All right, do it now while the jury's not here. You done?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's bring the jury back in. Doctor, you might want to be careful that pile doesn't end up on the floor.
I had left it there for him, but
Okay, yeah, thanks. State recognized presence of the jury?
We do, Your Honor.
Defense?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Lunneman, you may continue with your inquiry.
Yeah, we left off where I had asked you, or made the statement that you didn't ask him any questions about Facebook in his interview, and I gave you the video conference transcripts, the evaluation, to have you go through those and look to see if there were any. And
Yes.
apparently you have some.
yes, I found, do you want me to say more than yes, or? The answer is yes.
Okay.
Multiple.
Okay, well, let's talk about what they are.
Sure.
And just so we're clear on my focus, you went on and on about how interesting and important and all that about what he was actually writing in those. Correct?
I don't know that I went on and on, but no doubt I did emphasize that I thought that his Facebook postings were important.
Well, let me ask you first, do you have any questions that you asked him that even come close to that?
Absolutely. By my count, there's somewhere around 35 pages in a 220, 230-page transcript of my four and
Okay.
a half hour interview of him, where
Okay,
we
let's-
talk specifically about his use of Facebook and about the messages or the themes of messages that were included in his Facebook posts.
Okay, you may need this.
I've made note of the specific pages.
I understand, but
Okay.
there's a continuation. And so we're not looking
All right.
for an isolated point, we're looking for what the truth is, okay? So let's go through the first one. What page?
The first one that I found,
Yeah,
the first reference is on page 20, actually. So it was shortly into the interview.
Mr. Lenneman, do you have your mic on?
oh, I do not, Judge.
Yeah.
I do have it on me. Okay. Okay, page 20?
Thank you.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, what's the question?
We're just asking questions about the deposition.
I'm not sure what you're asking him.
There are no questions on page 20 that you ask about the Facebook, isn't that correct?
Well, I didn't phrase every question that related to Facebook by specifying Facebook. On page 20, I did in particular, because we were talking about how he adjusted and adapted once he returned to the community from prison. He began describing, or I asked him and he began describing about socializing by use of Facebook. It was a brave new world to him.
Well, here's my question, Doctor. Did you ask him a question about Facebook, or was that a continuation because he brought it up?
I could go back and look to be certain, but to be clear, I didn't have to ask him a question saying, do you remember posting such and such on Facebook in order to inquire, for example, about racism? I knew he had posted a lot of things on Facebook about racism. My eyes were tired from reading those thousands of pages of Facebook posts too. But we talked about that during the course of the examination. I can point to specific questions where that came up during the examination. So
Well,
it's kind of...
let's get to those
Let me
questions,
finish.
Doctor.
It's naive and narrow to think that any question that I asked him that related to Facebook postings or that was psychologically correlated with that began with Facebook, Mr. Loyd. Do you remember this on Facebook? Instead, what were his Facebook postings about? They were about racism. They were about corruption in the system. They were about distrust and hatred for the police and for the criminal justice system. And we covered a lot of those things in the course of the 4+ hours that I spent with him. I didn't have to prompt him by saying, do you remember posting this on Facebook? But there were many instances where it related directly to those Facebook postings. I'll give you specific examples if you like. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to go through and refresh my
Thank you for giving me
memory.
the page number, Doctor. You're looking at your notes.
I'm
I gave
get-
you 219 pages. I want you to look.
Lenneman, just
Mr.
ask
Lenneman,
questions.
you saw my notes. I've
Doctor,
got the page numbers on there.
Doctor, let him ask a question, and then you answer the question.
You said you went through and found all these postings, and you took aside these pages from this evaluation. But you're not telling me what's said that you claim. Like just a minute ago on page 20, you said, oh yeah, we talked about that. I asked him a question. If I remember correctly, I don't see a question on there. So tell me what the question is on page 20. No, okay. No, you have the, Doctor, did you not, before the jury came in,
Yes.
pull out the ones you claim are Facebook?
I'll be happy to show the jury. What I noted was each and every page where I found reference to dialogue that I had with Mr. Loyd that either directly related to his use of Facebook or indirectly related to the attitudes and beliefs that he espoused on Facebook. You only allowed me to give you the first page of this.
Doctor, you pulled out the pages that you think apply.
Absolutely.
You have them up there.
I did not pull the pages out. I made
No,
a note
no,
about
you
what
pulled-
page.
You actually pulled Facebook pages, didn't you?
Do you mean, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Did
What
you-
what do you mean, did I pull them
Did you take the pages that were relevant to you and pull them out of that?
out of this?
Yes.
This isn't his Facebook postings.
No, out of the interview that you claim you asked him all these relevant questions about Facebook.
You asked me this before. I did not pull them out. I made note of them
Well,
so
first
that
of
we
all,
could go
when
back to
When
them
did you make note of them?
during the recess while the
Okay.
jury was out.
Well, you got that in front of you. Let's start with page 20. What question did you ask him?
So if you want to narrow it to just where Facebook comes up on this particular page 20, we're talking about his dating relationships and his relationship with women and his activity in that regard. And he says, I'm inquiring about how he did that because it's pertinent to understanding what, was he disabled or not? Could he socialize with people? Could he meet them? Could he get their numbers? So my question was, you had their numbers and you would just call them or text them, or how would you, and before I could complete the question, he responded both. And the rest of my question was, how would you get things going with them? Answer, both. They would see me, and then Facebook was running. They would see me on Facebook and contact me and stuff like that.
And so that wasn't a question from you, that was a statement from him, correct?
That was a question from me where he referenced his use of Facebook. My question was, how did you make the acquaintance of all of these females? And his answer to me was through the use of Facebook.
Okay, what's the next one? Next page.
The next would be page 64.
And tell me about the question you asked him on here about Facebook.
A second to get to it. So at this point, I had begun to inquire about his relationship with Sade Dixon and how he had become acquainted with her. And I asked him specifically on page 64, how did that develop? And his response was, I met Sade online. She sent me a friend request, so I go on there like every other female. I do this, send me a friend request. I go on that page, make sure it's real before I accept you and your page, and he continued about that.
Okay, and then there's a question on that page, line 16, that you actually include the word Facebook. Want to read that to the jury?
Sure, I missed that, I think. So this was my question to Mr. Loyd. So you got out. How did you get familiar, that sophisticated with your use of Facebook? Did somebody teach you, or you taught yourself, or what?
Okay. And when is the next question that you ask?
Page 65.
We were on 65. That's the one you read. at
Oh,
the
I'm
bottom,
sorry, you're right. We
65.
covered 65. 66.
Okay. What's the question you ask?
So I asked a question. He had described to me just prior to this how his daughter had gone on Facebook and kind of acted as his female guard on Facebook. She would block females that she thought were undesirable for him. And so my question was, I was trying to make sure I understood what he was saying. My question was, so she was trying to be protective of her daddy then, is that right? And his answer was yes. And I said, I got it, all right. So you met Sade on Facebook, she sent you a friend request, and then he responded to that, and we continued in terms of my understanding how he developed a relationship with her.
Okay. What's the next one?
Next would be, let's see. Well, I've got 66, 67, 68, 69, and 70.
Okay, on any of those, do you actually pose a question that includes Facebook?
If you mean, is Facebook part of the language in my question?
Yes.
I'll look quickly. I don't recall. It does not appear that it was specifically a part of the language that I used in my question, but it was certainly the topic we were talking about and the description, the account that Mr. Loyd was giving me of his use and familiarity with it.
And as a matter of fact, on those 3 pages, he was talking about meeting girls, right?
Yeah, let's see. He was talking about meeting girls, and he was talking about having conflict with girls over issues of infidelity as discovered by virtue of online activities,
Okay.
including Facebook.
When is the next question you ask?
The next part of it that relates to Facebook postings is page 110.
And what question did you ask that relates to Facebook on that page?
My question is actually, let's see. My question is actually back at 108. He gave a rather lengthy answer, but my question on 108 was, all right, so you said don't talk about what happened. Give me just a second, because I'm not sure the context of that. Okay, now I recall the context. So I felt that it was important for me to understand his thinking and reasoning after the death of Miss Dixon and during the time that he was on the run from the police before Lieutenant Clayton was killed. And part of what I thought would be important to that would be understanding and questioning him about, from the moment that this happened with Miss Dixon, you know, what were you thinking? What were you expecting? What were you believing? What was the decision-making process?
Doc, what's the question?
I'm getting to that.
No, you're not.
Yes, I
No, you're
absolutely
not.
am.
Gentlemen,
You're the
gentlemen,
witness.
all right. This is how this is going to go. You're going to ask questions. You're going to answer questions. You're not going to interrupt each other. You're not going to talk over one another, and you are not going to get into arguments. You may proceed, Mr. Loyd.
Doctor, you referenced 108, page 108.
That's
this-
where my question was.
So I want you to tell me, read the question to the jury, and then you can say what it's about.
There are actually 3 of them, 3 questions on that page, or 3, it's a continuation. He's clarifying, he's nodding yes or answering yes or something like that. But it begins, that, so, all right, so I know that something happened on December 13th, and it may or may not be important for us to talk about that in some detail, I'm not sure, but I'm familiar with the events. Mr. Loyd responds, yes. I continued, that happened on that day. What I want to do for now, though, is I want you to just talk to me about after the incident at her house, or at her, I guess it was her parents' house. And he responds, uh-huh. And I continued, where this happens. I want you to talk to me about help me understand what you did, where you were, what you were doing, and what was going through your head after that. Mr. Loyd responds, all right, so you said don't talk about what happened? And I continued then, or I clarified my question. Well, it's up to you. If you think it's important for me to know about what happened now, then go ahead and tell me. But otherwise, we can start with after that incident, and get to the date in January that we need to talk about. But if there's something that you think is important for me to know about that, then feel free. And then his answer begins on 109 and continues through, I think, 112, and his answer pertains to the conflict between he and Ms. Dixon related to Facebook and Facebook postings and beliefs that they began to share that each of them had been unfaithful.
And so in those three questions, I didn't hear any verbiage that include Facebook with a question mark.
No, you heard it correctly. I didn't put any verbiage of that nature in there, nor did I necessarily, although I had some suspicion that it would prompt a response that related to Facebook from what I read. I didn't necessarily expect him to relate that, but he did.
Okay, so what is the next page?
Next is 133.
Okay, I want you to read the question out loud that references Facebook.
There's two questions. Neither of them use the verbiage Facebook, but the questions are 133, line 2. Well, I meant, who were you referring to? You meant the police were trying to, and he interrupted the question. He said, the police, yes, to the police, like, and I continued the question, how? How would that be? Help me understand how you believe that the police were motivated to kill you. And then he went on, and I can read his answer, but it
Yeah,
was...
why don't you read it, Doc?
Okay.
Overruled, go ahead.
Go ahead, Doc, read it.
Because they've been trying to kill me. The police always telling me, even before I went to prison, they was always telling me, they're going to kill us, they're going to try to frame. It's not my first time facing the death penalty. This time, they just had more. They got more to work with because I'm involved in the situation. Last time I was facing the death penalty, I had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on, but they were framing us and lying, and it was paying witnesses to come lie on us.
Okay. So is there anything else based on your question that relates to Facebook?
Beyond page 133?
Yes.
Yes, 138.
So we're skipping over to 138. So what you're saying, if I understand you, is the questions you asked on 138 are related to the answers or questions you asked on, 133 are related to the questions you ask or answers you get on 138. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I said. You asked me if there's what the next reference is, what the next part of my examination that pertains to his Facebook postings.
I meant to ask, and I'm sorry if I didn't do it correctly.
All
I meant to ask, other than the question you asked and what you read in 133, was there anything else that pertained to Facebook on that page?
Give me just a second. I think I read out loud to the end of that page, right?
I think so.
I asked him a follow-up question about the case that he was referring to where he alleged that he was framed.
Uh-huh.
You want me to read the question and answer?
Again, Your Honor, objection.
I'm going to sustain us to the answer, but allow us to the question.
Let's go to, what's the next thing that you wrote?
138.
Okay, and tell me, read me the question that is related to Facebook on 138.
So I'll begin on line 15. My question was, and the basis, what you considered to be the foundation of knowing that the police were out to kill him, was because the police told your family, no, We're not going to go tell the media to run a different story. Mr. Loyd, yeah, they say they're not responsible for what the news plays. Me, okay, so how is that trying to kill you? Mr. Loyd, because they've been killing us, they kill us for nothing. Me, yeah, but how is, and he interrupted me, Mr. Loyd, I'm talking about black people here in America. We get killed by the police on a regular basis.
Sustained.
All right, so what is the next page that you have about Facebook?
I'm on that page now, 139.
Okay? And read the question that you did in regards to Facebook.
So what were you thinking about your options were at that point?
Okay? And he responded to you?
He did.
Okay, what is the next page? And in his response, is there anything about Facebook?
There isn't anything where he specifically names Facebook, but he describes, again, beliefs, fixed beliefs that he has shared on Facebook.
And so he's describing fixed beliefs that he shared on Facebook, and they were obviously, at that point, in your mind, a fixed belief. You didn't know it was a false or not, correct?
It was a fixed belief about racism and injustice in the criminal justice system and in police and law enforcement in particular.
Okay. But you never went to the actual pages of the Facebook to investigate that, did you?
Just like you, I read those pages. I already had all of that information.
Okay.
I didn't need to ask him again, do you remember posting this on Facebook, or did you ever post this on Facebook?
Because
What I was looking
if
for
if
is
there-
the statements
Let me
that...
ask the question, Doctor. Because if he gives you an answer that you relate to Facebook, and it appears on its face that someone who is involved in that writing has a false, fixed belief, that could be a problem to you. Isn't that right?
If somebody is posting on Facebook and they are expressing what appear to be fixed, false beliefs that are unique to them and that are readily disprovable and that persist despite them being confronted with facts to the contrary, that could be evidence that would support that somebody was delusional.
Okay. Doc, what's the next page? And I apologize for calling you Doc, Dr. Gamache.
Where did we leave off? 138, 139, we've covered those. I've got 138, 139 twice, 140 twice, 145, and it goes on.
All right, so on those pages, 138, 139, 140, are there any questions that include the word Facebook?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. And what
Again,
was
I've tried to clarify that I didn't need to use the word Facebook to inquire about the underlying beliefs.
okay, so what's the next page?
Well, I gave you several at once. Again, to be clear, 138, 139 twice, 140 twice, 145,
Okay, so up to 140, we just talked about that. There are no questions that use the word Facebook,
not to my recollection, no.
okay? And now you're going to 145.
Correct.
Are there any questions on that page that use the word Facebook?
Where I use the word Facebook? No.
Yes.
On 145, I said, no, go ahead,
Okay.
continue.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
That's all I said. The rest of it is his statements to me.
Okay. And does his statements have anything to do with Facebook?
Yes.
How?
He's talking about how his language was, I've been through this shit before, and that's the same kind of thing that he posted on Facebook.
So you have a specific instance on page 145 where he's saying something that is completely related to Facebook, which would actually support or confirm that his state of mind and thinking on page 145 is consistent with his state of mind and thinking in Facebook. That's not important to you?
Compound question.
Sustained. Break up the question.
Yes. On page 145, he's talking about something you said was related to Facebook, right?
Correct.
Okay. He doesn't reference his Facebook at all in the following dialogue, does he?
He doesn't, and I didn't say that he does.
Okay. But what you're saying is he had facts that he presented to you that are consistent with his Facebook postings. Is that right?
What I'm saying is during my interview with him, there were repeated instances where whether either one of us used the word Facebook or not, where he talked about, where he expressed the very same kinds of beliefs, the very same kinds of attitudes that he had expressed on Facebook. Sometimes we literally talk about it in the context of Facebook postings, not even necessarily using the word. In other times, he's just talking generally, but what I'm identifying is how these generalizations are consistent with his posts.
But up to page 145, I haven't heard anything that is consistent with his postings in regards to his delusional thinking, his fixed false belief, racism, or any of that.
Well, we're a little more than halfway through. Much of the rest of it relates directly to that, and I'm happy to share it.
Okay, well, let's keep going. What's next?
162.
Okay. Is there a question on 162 that uses the word Facebook from you?
No.
In this post, on this page, or whatever follows, does any of that come from anything to do with his Facebook pages that include delusional thinking, fixed false beliefs, mental illness, any of that?
Not delusional thinking, but certainly this theme of the system being racist and police being racist. And in this instance, it's related to my inquiry about his perception of Lieutenant Clayton, I believe.
And he actually gave you what he believes happened. Isn't that right?
Well, not directly in relation to that question, because the question was how he perceived her, but I inquired about directly what he recalled happening.
And he described that for you, right?
He did to a point.
Well, tell me when the point stopped. Point to a sentence or a question that you asked that redirects him.
All right. Page 179, line 19.
So he talks about that all through those pages, the events that occurred with Lieutenant Clayton.
Well, it's not one continuous narrative from him. I'm asking him questions step by step, breaking down from the minute he arrives at Walmart until he leaves Walmart.
And let's talk about, doctor, you said that I interrupted your evaluation. Wasn't that your testimony?
I don't recall if I testified to that today or not, but if I didn't, I'll say it now.
Okay.
You did.
As part of your role working for the state of Florida, you're able to gather information from a defendant that the state of Florida, wouldn't normally be able to gather in a case involving insanity. Isn't that right?
In a case of insanity, the defendant is raising their mental state at the time of the crime. So the prosecutor is entitled to retain their own experts to independently assess that. If the defendant, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is if the defendant doesn't raise their mental state at the time of the crime, then I wouldn't be able to ask those kinds of questions.
And so during that period of time, you were asking him question after question after question, and many of those questions were not open-ended. Open-ended question goes like, so what happened? Tell me what was going
Objection to
on.
the relevance of
Sustained.
any.
He brought it up, Judge, on direct.
Sustained, rephrase.
And you were asking him many leading questions, and you were challenging him. Were you not?
Same objection.
Overruled. I'll let him answer this question.
You were challenging him, weren't you?
I did challenge him, and I'd like the opportunity to explain why I did.
Please.
So there is an important distinction to be made between conducting a clinical interview with somebody that is willingly coming to you for help versus a forensic interview. In forensic interviews, defendants aren't particularly enthusiastic about talking with an expert that's been hired by the state, and they're not particularly enthusiastic about answering questions. And so if I simply treat them like a patient with depression that's come to see me to get some help with their depression, I'm going to have a different style than when I'm trying to gather information in order to answer questions for the court and for the trier of fact. So yes, when I did not perceive Mr. Loyd's responses to be, or when I did not perceive his answers to be necessarily responsive to my question, I would ask the question in another way, or I would challenge him about something that wasn't consistent.
And as a matter of fact, you would make statements to him that were things like, well, that's not factually supported, or how do you do that? Isn't that right?
It's possible. If you can direct me to a page in line, I'll be happy to look at it.
179, question starts with right. That's when I objected initially.
Give me a second.
179.
Right. So line 17, I responded to something he was telling me. This pertained to the moment when he comes out of the store, out of the Walmart, and is confronted by Lieutenant Clayton. And he's giving me an account of that. And I said, right. And I would understand that. I would understand if that was factually supported, but, and then you interrupted me.
And didn't I say in the...
Objection to what counsel said.
Sustained.
Okay, so let me understand this. I know you're not a lawyer, but in this particular case, unlike many other cases, you're not videotaped. Isn't that correct?
No, I was videotaped. No. This entire exam was videotaped.
I understand that, but most cases that are capital, they don't videotape.
No, I wouldn't agree with that.
So that's video. Go ahead.
when I'm hired by the defense, they typically don't videotape me. But when I'm hired by the state, the defense usually insists on videotape.
Okay.
And I'm agreeable to that. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Well, if you're agreeable to that, you remember Vernon Stevens?
Yeah, you mentioned that name before. I'm sure you're asking accurately that it was a case that I did. I don't recall.
And as a matter of fact,
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
so we were talking about it being videotaped, and then this was transcribed, where everything he said is taken down. All the questions, all the answers. Is that right?
That's correct.
This is a document that was providable to the defense and the state, right?
Excuse me, and to me, yes.
Okay. So you're aware, you know, doctor, that if you give a prior inconsistent statement, I can impeach you with prior statements you made. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So if you said in a transcript, the light is green, you're saying on the stand, the light is blue, I can impeach you with the light is green statement. Isn't that correct?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
And did you know whether Mr. Loyd was going to testify or not?
At that time, I did not.
So that transcript would have no value unless Mr. Loyd testified. Isn't that right? Because it's not allowed to be introduced.
Objection, relevance. It's a legal
Sustained.
conclusion.
Sustained.
All right, what is the next page after 179?
$185.
And what is the question that you ask that includes Walmart reference?
I'm sorry, the question that I asked that includes what?
I'm sorry, the Facebook reference.
My question begins at the bottom of page 184. Question, okay, so that didn't happen until after the death of Lieutenant Clayton.
Where is this? I'm missing this. What page is this?
Bottom of 184, top of 185.
Gotcha. Okay, go ahead.
I read it.
Yes, sir. Oh, and what does it have to do with Facebook?
His answer has to do with and correlates with his Facebook postings.
And what's his answer?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
It doesn't have the word Facebook in it, does it?
No.
As a matter of fact, it's like you said before. He's talking about things that you would believe, depending on what a psychologist believes, but a person who's doing an interview, it's important to determine whether what he's saying is delusional, paranoid, because it's consistent with many of the other things he said, right?
Well, that's my exact point, Mr. Lenneman. You seem to be very fixated on some concrete reference to Facebook. And what I'm trying to explain to you, what I've tried to explain multiple times, is that the question may not have used the word Facebook, the answer may not have referred to Facebook, but it's the theme, it's the thought process, it's the beliefs, it's the attitudes that he espoused on Facebook, that I became familiar with in reviewing the records, and that he talks about specifically in the context of the death of Lieutenant Clayton. That's the connection.
But you never actually put the Facebook pages, which you claim to have read, into action by saying, Mr. Loyd, you're saying this. What do you mean by this? What's going on with this, Mr. Loyd? Is that
Objection,
correct?
asked and answered.
Sustained.
What's your next page?
Continues with his second answer on 185, and then The next page I noted is 189.
Okay, just so we can save time, because you've said this many times, going through the rest of the pages, is there an actual question that has the word Facebook in it that you ask?
I do not recall, and it's not indexed. I don't have a quick way to answer that. But when I went through it during the recess, I don't recall seeing Facebook literally in the questions that I asked for the rest of the examination. It may be, but I don't remember seeing it.
Okay, let's make this clear. I gave you 219 pages to look through.
Yes,
You sat there for the entire break that the jury was out, going through page by page by page. Isn't that correct?
that's correct.
At the end of the pages, you stuck it up on the corner and indicated you were through.
That's correct.
So now I'm asking you the question again. Do you recall any questions that have the word Facebook on them?
Asked and answered.
Sustained.
On page 189, do you have that in front of you?
I do.
The defendant actually tells you, he wanted,
Objection.
Sustained.
this goes to impeachment, Judge. May I come sidebar?
Yes. You may proceed.
Yes, Doctor. In any of the 200-plus pages of this evaluation, did you ever ask my client a single question about racism? Other than when he brings it up and talks about it, did you ask him any questions?
I can't recall a specific question, but I literally didn't need to ask because he volunteered that information to me many times during the examination.
Did he talk to you about the media, Doctor?
Is this a different subject?
Yeah, we're done with Facebook.
Okay. Yes, he did.
Okay. And didn't he tell you that the media was lying on him?
Yes, he did.
And that he had his niece reach out and try to reach both the police and the media?
Objection. Self-serving hearsay.
Sustained.
Doctor, how important is culture to any given evaluation done by psychologists?
I consider it to be very important. I consider it to be, and I considered it to be very important in this case.
Did you ever talk to any of my clients' family members?
I did not, but I certainly had information about statements that they had made
And that was
in other
from-
interviews, so I didn't see the need to interview them directly myself.
And that was from the last penalty phase that occurred in the killing of Miss Dixon.
Some of it was from that, and if I'm not mistaken, there's so much to remember about this that I'm not entirely certain, but I think Dr. Toomer had indicated that he also spoke with some family members of Mr. Loyd.
Okay.
And of course, as I said, I listened to the testimony of two of his siblings.
Now, after we talked about Facebook and your evaluation and all of that, you had said on direct examination that you wanted to get inside his head and understand his function. Is that right?
And understand his thinking, his reasoning, his emotions, and his actions on the day of this offense.
Well, isn't it true that you can never, or it's not scientifically reliable, to ever just evaluate on a moment in time when something happens? Is that correct?
Well, the law specifically is referring to this moment in time. Can I ever 100% reconstruct in my mind what happened and what was in the defendant's mind? No, I doubt that it's ever a 100% reconstruction because the information, the data that I'm getting may not be entirely accurate, but that's certainly the focus, and one of the best sources for that kind of information is the defendant.
Okay.
He's the only one that knows for sure what he was thinking and what he was feeling at the time. We can, as a psychologist, I can make certain inferences from his behavior and from his history, from his background, from his past conduct, and I did that in this case.
Okay.
And
But
culture was an important part of my analyzing that.
Okay, tell me about why culture, in your opinion, was important and how you used it.
Well, again, as I explained, the definition of a delusion, how do you know if something is really a delusion? Lots of people, and in fact, lots of groups or subsets of people have fixed beliefs about things that, I may think they're not entirely plausible. Lots of people may think they're not entirely plausible or that it's somehow distorted in some way. But just because they have those beliefs that I don't really see, I wouldn't necessarily share those beliefs, and not everybody else would share those beliefs. It doesn't mean that it's the product of mental illness. And I offered to give an example of that before. I'm happy to do it now because I think it would really help everybody understand.
Does that example have to do with my client being black and you looking at the culture that he comes from, originates from?
No, I would say it has to do with understanding why I attached such significance to understanding the culture that he comes from and the part of that culture that he identifies with.
In the last question I asked you, Doctor, you talked for about 3 minutes and you didn't even answer my question. Is that something you do regularly? Is that
Argumentative.
Sustained.
you didn't answer my question? My question was, in regards to culture, how did you use this in the evaluation?
I considered what Mr. Loyd has said, what Mr. Loyd said to me, what he has posted a lot of on Facebook, on social media, and what he has said to others about his beliefs. I contemplated that in the context of his background and history, and I refreshed my memory about some subsets of the culture, of our culture in the United States, that share very, very similar beliefs. I also made note of the ways that he symbolically identifies with those subsets of the culture. So in other words, these are beliefs that he shares with a proportion of our population. Whether that includes me or not, I'm a psychologist evaluating him. That's not important to me. But it is important to understand it from the context of where he comes from and what he thinks and what he believes. And so in that process, I researched the neighborhoods that he grew up in. I knew a little bit about them. I'm familiar with Orlando, but I made a point of looking at them and looking at their history. I researched some of the different groups or subsets of the population that I know from past experience and past cases to espouse, to endorse the kinds of beliefs and thoughts that he has. And I mentioned some of those before, including sovereign citizens, black nationalists, Black Panthers, and he uses some of the terms, he evidently gets some of the terms in support of his belief directly from those kinds of sources. So I thought that was incredibly important in trying to figure out, is this just something that Mr. Loyd, that was generated inside his head on the basis of some mental illness that he suffers? Or is this something that's a somewhat more widespread belief among a subset, and he identifies with it, and he talks in the same language and expresses some of the same thoughts and beliefs? My conclusion was, it's the same kinds of thoughts and beliefs.
And in that investigation you conducted, did you generate any documents that showed you did the investigation?
Sure. I printed out some things, or I saved some things on my computer that were related to that.
And you
I've
did-
got some of them with me today.
You didn't provide that to the state?
I don't remember if I did or not. I don't think so.
Now, you had talked about one of the things that you used in determining your decision on Mr. Loyd's state of mind was the thought process that he went through in acquiring guns. Is that correct?
I told you that today, yes.
Yeah. And you didn't tell us that he actually told you in that interview that he was working at a chicken place and making $1,000 an hour. I think you mentioned that, but he got robbed. Isn't that right?
$1,000 a day, not an hour.
I'm
And
sorry.
yes, he described to me being robbed twice while working there.
And is there a reason why you didn't say that on direct?
I don't remember being asked a question where that would have been responsive.
Okay.
But I definitely talked about how that related to his decision-making with regard to breaking the law and acquiring guns as a convicted felon.
I have no further questions, Doctor. Thank you for...
You're welcome.
Redirect.
Briefly, Dr. Gamache, we did in fact have a conversation yesterday about whether or not to address the Facebook issue, right?
I didn't hear his question, Judge.
My question was, we did have a conversation yesterday, today's Monday, yes, yesterday, about whether or not to bring up the Facebook post on direct examination.
You'll have to forgive me if, I know we talked yesterday, that may have been part of our discussion, and certainly that's your decision what to ask me. I don't independently recall right now.
Did we discuss streamlining your direct examination?
Yes, we did.
In other words, making it shorter and more easy to understand given the volume of the testimony?
And now that you say that, it was probably in the, I do recall now that it was in the context of streamlining. I apologize, I didn't remember that
Okay.
initially.
We also discussed the idea that Mr. Linneman would bring it up on cross-examination and you could deal with it then.
You did share with me that you anticipated that, yes.
Now, you, on a couple of occasions, wanted to give an example of a delusion that is not a false belief and how you distinguish between a fixed belief and a false belief. If you'd like to give that example, please do so.
if I interview a defendant in a case and they tell me, and let's even make it even closer by analogy to Mr. Lloyd's case, not only do they tell me, but there's some writings that they have made where they're describing the belief that they're not really a human being, that they're some immortal alien, and that they just are encompassed by a human skeleton, and they've been around for eons and eons of time, and that their objective is to escape this human skeleton and return to their immortal alien state. Doesn't sound particularly plausible to me. Sounds like it could be a fixed false belief that this person is experiencing, until I look carefully at the subset of the culture that they belong to. And I've had that experience, that kind of scenario, and what I discovered was that that individual was expressing their belief in Scientology, that that's a core belief among Scientologists, and that represents anywhere between 200,000 and 4 million people in this world. So we don't diagnose all Scientologists as suffering from some kind of delusion because that's their belief. It's shared amongst the people that they identify with. It doesn't necessarily spring from some mental illness that they suffer, even though many of us may find that to be peculiar or unusual.
That's all I have. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, may this witness be excused. State,
Yes, Your Honor, he may.
defense? All right, thank you, doctor. You are free to go.
Thanks, Judge, I appreciate it.
All right.